So we've discussed the three broad categories of argument appeals: pathos, ethos, and logos. And now we'll be moving on to discussing kind of more technically the parts of an argument. So this is Argument Lecture 2, Reading and Evaluating Arguments. So our objectives in this discussion will be to recognize the parts of an argument, to identify the strategies being used, and to evaluate the success of the argument based on these parts and these strategies. So first of all, for emphasis sake, for repetition's sake, what is an argument? Well, it's not used in the sense that we would typically see it, in that it's not necessarily combative, but an argument, as far as a composition class like this is concerned, is presenting reasons and evidence to support a viewpoint. So the purpose of argument is to persuade with reasons and evidence. So what are the parts of an argument that we're talking about? Well, first of all, we have our issue, then our claim, our support, and finally we'll talk about refutations, which a successful argument should also have. So what is the issue? Well, think about the issue in the same way that you'd think about in a thesis statement, in an argument thesis statement, the topic or the subject. So the issue or the topic or subject is just kind of the broad controversy about which people disagree. In that sense, thinking in the same way, what would the claim be? Well, if the issue is like the topic or subject of the thesis, then the claim would be like the side. So the claim is where you actually take a position or take a side. So your claim is your position on that issue. And your support, if you're still thinking along the lines of a thesis statement, if the issue is your topic, the claim is your side, then what would the support be? Well, if you said the preview of arrangement of ideas, then you'd be correct. So the support is basically the reasons and evidence that you plan to present to support the claim, to show that the claim is reasonable and should be accepted. So what does it mean to refute something? What is a refutation? Well, to refute something is to argue against the opposing viewpoints. So once again, a successful argument essay should do this as well. In addition to supporting its own claims, it should also ideally acknowledge and argue against the opposing side. So the fact that there is an argument at all means that there is an opposing side, and it's not really good practice to just ignore what that opposing side might say. You'll want to acknowledge it and argue against it as well. So for example, let's take those four items and come up with a real-life example. So let's say that our issue or our topic or subject is texting while driving. Notice we haven't said anything yet about texting while driving. We're just stating the topic or the issue. Adding a claim is when you take a side. So here I'm saying texting while driving should be punished more severely than it currently is. So that's definitely a side, and it's a side because it's debatable. So someone could say, no, texting while driving should not be punished, or it should not be punished more severely, or it should be punished less severely. So in a case like that, what would your support be? Well, anything that you say in support of that claim, that texting while driving should be punished more severely. So support would be anything that you present to show that that claim is correct. So in this specific instance, I've said texting while driving should be punished more severely because it results in similar amounts of accidents as drunk driving, which may or may not actually be the case. That's just a statistic that I kind of pulled out of nowhere to make an example. So what might a possible refutation be here? Well, if you made the claim that texting while driving should be punished more severely than it is, perhaps the other side would say, well, wait a minute, that's not necessarily the case. You can't just punish all texting while driving more severely, because what about drivers who are not doing it in a dangerous way? What about drivers who are only texting at red lights or stuck in traffic that's moving a mile an hour? So that might be what the other side says. So if you were to refute that, you would acknowledge that that is what the other side says, and then you would argue against that. And the arguing against that would be your refutation. So next, let's talk about types of claims. So in addition to classifying argument strategies according to the kinds of appeals they use. You can also classify them according to the type of claim that they're making. So what are those distinct categories? Well, we'll talk about claims of fact, claims of value, and claims of policy. Now, we should note that a single argument can include facets of more than one of these types of claims. So if you're reading an essay and you think to yourself, wait a minute, this essay's main argument is a claim of value and policy. That may very well be the case. But for the most part, you can look at an argument and say, this is mostly a claim of one of these. So first and foremost, what is a claim of fact? Well, we know what a fact is. It's a statement that can be proven or verified by observational research. So that's really what a claim of fact is doing. It's claiming that something is the case or something is true. So the thing to keep in mind with a claim of fact, if it were a pure and indisputable fact, then it wouldn't be an argument in the first place because there would be no one who could debate it. So a claim of fact still does have to be, in a sense, debatable. So for example, within 10 years, global warming will have caused 75% of the polar ice caps to melt, swelling the ocean's volume to dangerous levels. So why is this claim of fact, it's stating a fact, why is this claim of fact still debatable? Well, you could say, because this particular argument is saying this is going to happen within 10 years, you could say that's not the case. There's no way to know for sure what's going to happen within 10 years because we're not 10 years in the future. So you could still present evidence that suggests otherwise. So don't get caught up in the idea that a claim of fact has to be just unassailably true. That's not necessarily the case. It still is an argument, so you still can argue the other side. But a claim of fact is based on fact, observation, or research. So what is a claim of value then? Well, we know what it means for something to have value. It is good or better than something else. So that really is what a claim of value is as well. It's stating that one thing or one idea is better than or more desirable than another. It can also state that something is worse than something else, worse than, more unethical than, or something like that. But it has to do with the value of the idea or the thing in question. So an example of a claim of value might be, power walking is better exercise than running or jogging because it provides similar benefits to the cardiovascular system while causing less damage to the joints. Okay, so in this case, how do I know that I'm looking at a claim of value? Well, if you picked out that word better as your cue, then you were correct. So when you say something is better than something else, in this case, power walking being better than jogging, that's a pretty sure sign that you're looking at a claim of value. Finally, what is a claim of policy? Well, we know what policy means. It's something that should be or ought to be done or instituted. So that's what a claim of policy does. It suggests what should or ought to be done to solve a problem of some kind. So for example, a claim of policy argument might say something like, to reduce school violence, more gun and metal detectors should be installed in public schools. So what makes this a claim of policy? Well, I'm suggesting that something should be done. I'm suggesting a specific solution. So my solution here is apparently gun and metal detectors being installed in public schools. So how could I have made this a claim of fact? Well, you could have said something like, school violence in the United States is out of control and within 15 years will be the #1 cause of death among young people, or something like that, which is not necessarily the case. That's just an example. How could I have made this a claim of value? Well, you could have tweaked it a little bit and said that metal detectors have proven to be more of a deterrent against school violence than counseling, or something along those lines, because now you have two options. One is better than the other. Once again, that is probably not the case. I just made that up on the spot to give you an example of how this could have been changed to a claim of value instead. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense so far. So why don't we have a little bit of practice identifying the claims. So I'll give you 3 examples and you can tell me, based on what you've just learned, which one you think you're looking at. A claim of fact, a claim of value, or a claim of policy. So this first one says, every year, thousands of physically healthy abandoned pets are euthanized because shelters cannot afford to feed and house them. Okay, so am I stating a solution to a problem? No, so that's definitely not a claim of policy. Am I stating that one thing is better than another? No, there's no mention of that at all. Nothing is better than or worse than something else. So if you said this is a claim of fact, then you were correct. I'm saying that this is factually the case. These animals are being euthanized because of XYZ. So that's a claim of fact. So look at the second example. Euthanizing animals who have nothing physically wrong with them should be outlawed. So what are we looking at here, and why do we know that's what we're looking at? If you said we're looking at a claim of policy, then you were correct. Why is this a claim of policy? Again, it's suggesting a solution, something that should be done. So the solution here is that euthanizing animals who are physically healthy should be outlawed. So when something should happen, should not happen, should change in some way, then that would be a claim of policy. Very good. Finally, perhaps by process of elimination, you've already figured this is a claim of value and you are correct. But perhaps we can talk anyway about why this is the case. So this one reads, no-kill shelters such as Noah's Ark in Northwest Houston are better than mainstream shelters like the SPCA and the Animal Anti-Cruelty League. So if you singled out the word better, then you're onto something. That is really what makes this a claim of value. It's saying that one alternative, a no-kill shelter like Noah's Ark, is better than another alternative, i.e. mainstream shelters. So very good. Hopefully this was easy enough, straightforward enough. And if that's the case, we can try writing our own claims. So why don't you humor me and pick one of the following subjects and see if you can write 3 claims about them. So one of each kind of claim. So let's say you pick obesity. See if you can, based on that subject, based on that issue, you can write a claim of fact, a claim of value, and a claim of policy. So take a second to do that. And I guess there's no way for me to know if you did that or not. But just for example's sake, we can go over one of those. So why don't we go over cheating on tests? So what would a possible claim of fact be on the subject of cheating on tests? Well, you could say something along the lines of, cheating on tests is a major problem in schools across the country, and cheating increases among students by as much as 10% every calendar year. Now, is that true? Probably not, because I just made it up now. But that would be a claim of fact. I'm stating that something is the case on the subject of cheating on tests. So what about a claim of value on the same subject? Well, once again, just making up something here, you could say cheating on an assignment or cheating on a test is worse than not turning in an assignment at all. So whether you agree with that or not, I don't think I even agree with that. Whether you agree with that or not, that's definitely a claim of value because you said something is better than or worse than something else. So what about a claim of policy? Claim of policy might be something along the lines of, cheating on tests should be punished by suspension from school. Okay, so that's something that you're suggesting that should be done. That's a solution. So if cheating on tests is such a big problem, this is what could fix it. Making sure that the students are punished with suspension. Now, once again, do we agree with any of those? Not necessarily. In fact, no. But they hopefully serve as nice examples of claims of fact, value, and policy. Okay, very good. So in addition to making different types of claims, writers also present different types of support in order to bolster these claims. So let's talk briefly about types of support. So earlier on we talked about issues, we talked about claims and the kinds of claims of fact, value, and policy. Now we'll talk about types of support. So first of all, kind of the broadest category of support is what we refer to as reasons. So reasons are what you might typically see in your thesis statement as the preview of ideas to follow in the essay. So these are general statements that support a claim. Now the evidence, this is where you get specific. This is what you might expect to see within the body of the essay itself. So within your body paragraph and your supporting paragraphs, which are the same thing, body and supporting paragraphs, this is where you would actually have to prove the truthfulness of your reasons. So what kind of evidence are we talking about? Well, there are different kinds of evidence: facts, statistics, experiences, comparisons or analogies, examples, anything that's presented to show why the claim is valid. So we're talking mostly about logos here. Then too, in our first lecture on the subject of argument, we talked about emotional appeals, and that falls under pathos, as we talked about. So emotional appeals, those are ideas that are targeted towards needs or values that readers are likely to care about. So something that triggers emotion, that's obviously an emotional appeal. So that is in and of itself a type of support. So let's look at some examples of a reason, evidence, and emotional appeal. And I've chosen the same basic subject here, which is eating more vegetables, which is kind of a weird and boring topic, but it serves to prove the point. So a possible reason why we should eat more green vegetables, like broccoli, is because they improve our health. So let's say this essay is all about the argument that people should eat more green vegetables. Reason number one might be because they improve our health. So that in and of itself is a reason. Why do you eat more vegetables? Because they improve your health. So what kind of evidence would you be able to present to support that claim? Well, fortunately, if you're arguing that broccoli is good for you, you have plenty of evidence out there. So the examples I've chosen are one statistic and one personal example. So you could say, my sister Victoria eats green vegetables regularly and she hasn't been sick for 5 years. Incidentally, this is kind of a hasty conclusion, because this is just one person and it's being used to make such a broad claim. But this would be a nice example of an example. So another piece of evidence you might use would be something like a statistic, some data, case studies, etc. So an example of a statistic would be to say something like, studies show that people who eat green vegetables are 50% less likely to contract seasonal flu viruses. So that's another totally made up statistic, but it proves the idea here, that a statistic is a kind of evidence. So I feel like this slide is probably so easy that it's actually confusing. So don't get terribly caught up in terminology here. You know what a reason is, you know what evidence is. So if you have a basic understanding of what those two words mean, then you have an understanding of this lecture for the most part. So emotional appeal, a nice example of an emotional appeal under this subject might be, mothers, do you want to do what's best for your children? If you do, serve them green vegetables at least twice a week. Okay, so this is appealing to a parent's desire to do the best thing for their children. So that's why it's an example of an emotional appeal. So once again, I have no way of knowing if you're actually trying it for yourself or not. But humor me, take one of the claims that you wrote down earlier, the claim of fact, value, or policy, and write one of each of the following about that claim. So see if you can provide a reason, a piece of evidence, and an emotional appeal. Just take a second to do that. So let's say that we're still on the subject of cheating on tests. And my cheating on tests claim of policy was that cheating should be punished by suspension from school. So what could a reason be for that specific claim? Well, I could say cheating on tests should be punished by suspension from school because it drives home to the student the seriousness of dishonesty. So that would be a good reason. So I'm trying to prove my claim that cheating should be punished in a specific way, my claim of policy, and I'm using the reason that punishing by suspension drives home the seriousness of dishonesty. So that would be my reason. So what about a piece of evidence? Well, I can just make something up that is apparently proof of that. So I could say something like, studies show that when a student is simply given a failing grade for that assignment, rather than being suspended, he or she is 5 times more likely to cheat again. Once again, that is a fact, but it's a totally made up one. But it proves the point that that would be a piece of evidence. So how about an emotional appeal? How could I make an emotional appeal on the subject of punishing cheating on tests with suspension? Well, here's an example. If we as parents really care about our children's future, we will say yes to stricter punishments for cheating. So why is that an emotional appeal? Well, anytime you appeal to a parent wanting the best for their child, you're probably looking at an emotional appeal. So once again, an emotional appeal, pathos is appealing to the feelings or the emotions of the audience and trying to persuade them based on that. Okay, so hopefully this is pretty clear, pretty straightforward so far. So finally, let's discuss briefly refutations. So that was the last thing we considered. Once again, a good argument will also refute or argue against opposing claims. So it's one thing to argue your own side, to have your own claim, your own reasons, your own evidence, and your own appeals. But what about considering the appeals that the other side is making? So here's a nice example of a refutation in action. And it's from a very interesting article that I won't ask you to read, but I actually recommend it. It's very interesting. Entitled, Believe Me, It's Torture. I think it's by Christopher Hitchens. But this is an excerpt from this article, and it's actually talking about the controversial practice of waterboarding, which some people say is a torture and some people say is not. But this is a quote from that article, and it says, "You may have read by now the official lie about this treatment, which is that it simulates the feeling of drowning. This is not the case. You feel that you are drowning because you are drowning, or rather being drowned, albeit slowly and under controlled conditions." So what this quote is doing is it's arguing against or refuting people who believe that waterboarding should not be considered real torture. So you'll notice that it doesn't just ignore the fact that there is another side. It acknowledges that there is another side, and then it argues against that. So in this specific case, what is the other side? Well, the other side is anyone who says that waterboarding is not torture because it's only simulating drowning. It's not actually causing physical damage. It's not actually drowning you. So how does it refute that? Well, it calls it the official lie about that treatment. And then it presents what it believes that official lie is, that it's a simulation of drowning. And then it argues against that by saying, no, you are actually being drowned. So that's a nice example of refutation in action. So try that for yourself too. Take one of the claims that you wrote down earlier about immigration or obesity or whatever those other examples were, and think about what the opposing side might have to say about your argument. So try to write down your own refutation to argue against the opposing side. So let's say, once again, I'm picking the same subject because it's just easier for me. Cheating should be punished by suspension from school, and I gave my reason, I gave my facts, my evidence, I gave my emotional appeal. So how could I refute the opposing side? Well, I could say something like, there are many who say that suspension from class is too harsh. However, etc., etc., etc. And then basically prove again that it's not too harsh because of all the benefits as outlined. So once again, refutation, acknowledging that there is another side, briefly pointing out what that other side might say, and then arguing against that other side is called refutation, and it's a mark of a good essay. It's a mark of a balanced and reasonable essay. If you just completely ignore the opposing side, then that actually is a strike against your essay and your persuasion. So how to apply this just in general? Again, the point of this lecture was reading and understanding an argument essay. So to make this even more practical, how would you approach reading an argument essay? And that actually is your discussion assignment, I believe, for this week, is reading an argument essay by Susan Schoen. It's an extremely interesting essay about the treatment of the bodies of Native American Indians and how the government has almost made it acceptable for them to become public property and be present in museums and institutions and things like that. So apply these same strategies to reading that essay and for that assignment. So what do you do when you're presented with an argument essay? Well, first of all, you'd want to read through for an initial impression. Then I would recommend that you read the argument several more times and annotate as you read. And to annotate, falling over myself here, to annotate as you read is just to take notes. So the first time you read an essay or an argument through, read it just for your first impressions and for actual meaning. After that, read through trying to find the specific things that we talked about, such as claims, reasons, evidence, refutations, etc. And that is what this homework assignment, this discussion assignment rather, is going to be asking you to do, to point out specific claims, reasons, and evidence and refutations that Susan Schoen is using in her essay. So thanks for watching, and I wish you success on your discussion assignment.